Former Business New Zealand boss Phil O'Reilly was one of 11 members on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group. He describes the changes recommended in the report as transformational.
The idea is that the social welfare system is really not fit for purpose for today. It probably hasn't been fit for purpose for many years. So what we're recommending is a really radical change away from a focus on sanctions and rules, along a focus of shared expectations, mutual expectations, where yes, there are expectations on you as a player, as a person who is getting welfare, but there's also expectations on the state to treat you fairly and to make sure that you get access to the right benefits and so on. So much more to that kind of more dignified response to welfare rather than what we've got into in the past, which is much more rules-based, much more thinking of welfare recipients rather in a dehumanised sort of capacity, really.
Okay, so if you want transformational change and you want to move to a dignified system, what have we currently got? Because you sat through people telling you their stories. What did they tell you?
The system's really become quite dehumanising. It's become quite difficult to be treated fairly and equitably and with dignity in the system. And I say that as one who hadn't dealt with the system much. I mean, I walked in as a New Zealander into many of those meetings and interviews around the country with those engaged in the system, those who are clients of the system. And I just walked in with an open mind, willing to let the evidence take me where it would. And what I found was some really sad stories, and I found some stories that were quite, I think for any New Zealander to listen to them, they would be challenged by them, because I think most New Zealanders would think that, we pay an awful lot of money for our welfare system and we would expect that it would treat people fairly and well, and that they would get back to work if they could. And in reality, it doesn't do a very good job of any of those things, hence the kind of radical reform that we're talking about in the report.
Okay, so what is the cost of transformational change and a dignified system? How much will that cost us?
Well, it's a big number. We recommended $5 billion worth of extra spending per year. That's a big number, and unsurprisingly the government's not making much of a comment about that today. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to if I was them either. But when you look at that $5 billion spend, have a look at how much we're currently wasting because the system simply doesn't do the job it needs to do. Just tonight, for example, there will be, these are public figures, 880 people living in motels in the Hawke's Bay. 440 of those will be children. Now that's a huge cost that's unheralded. We don't know what that cost is currently. We don't talk about that. That's the kind of cost we could potentially save. The cost of people turning up to hospitals that are sick, who are living in substandard housing, the cost of theft, the cost of drug addiction, because we're simply not looking after these people and they turn themselves to desperate ways. Now that's not being a bleeding heart liberal. That's the evidence. That's what the data tells us. And so when we look at that big headline number, $5 billion, it's a lot of money. Even I swallowed when I saw that figure. That's a big number. But when you look at if you think about that as an investment over time in dragging down some of those other costs, I think you'd find it probably would be a good investment, more particularly if you can get people into good work while paying work and get them paying some taxes rather than being, if you like, some sort of burden on the taxpayer.
But you understand the politics, that you have to bring people along with you or you won't be in government next time round. So, I mean, how do you sell that? How do you sell that to voters? Well,
it's not that easy, but I'd hope that people like me saying it matters, and I hope that the breadth of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, 11 people from pretty different sort of backgrounds all saying this, I hope also that the work that's gone into the report, its scale, its heft, the research that's gone into it, will help persuade people. But above all, I really hope that politicians don't politicise it. What's really happened in the welfare system over the last 20 or 30 years, I think, is that it's had some of the worst politics around it I could have seen. What will happen is someone will do something bad, they'll commit a crime or something will happen, and all of a sudden there's this big rule that for all welfare recipients, just because that one person or some two people did something bad, that's the result of petty politics being played in the system. I think it's important that this report is not owned by the politicians, it's owned by New Zealanders, and I hope that they take it away and have a look at it and think about it, so that we don't return to the slogans of politicians of either side on the political divide. That we actually have a decent debate in New Zealand about how we want to treat those who are not well off and who are vulnerable, particularly those who are vulnerable through no fault of their own, through things like a mental illness.
I know you say you don't want it to go that way, but come on, you've got three parties in a government, right, who have to come to an agreement on it. One of them has got this change, overhaul in their confidence and supply agreement. Then you've got another major party, New Zealand First, with Winston Peters. Really?
Yeah, well, when you saw Tracy Martin today at the launch of the thing, New Zealand First Minister, of course, supporting some changes that would otherwise have been seen to be pretty radical a few years ago. The change which penalises a woman for not naming the father of the child. So there is some change going on, but I think this is actually long run change. And my sense is that it's over to the politicians now to put aside that political piece and hopefully explain what they're trying to do. Hopefully we've given them some tools to do that. But to your point, I could be as cynical as anyone and say this is never going to happen. If that's the case, that means those people who are currently worse off than we might expect they are, as we hope they would be as New Zealanders on welfare, their lot won't get any better, and I think that'll be a terrible outcome.
Well, here's the thing though. So in your report, you make over more than 40 recommendations. Yep. I think there was 4 that you basically said were critical and they should be done with urgency. No sooner has the report been released, and one of the recommendations you said should come in with urgency was to raise benefits by up to 47%. Report comes out, followed by a press release from Labor saying, no, not going to do that immediately.
Well, Lisa, you need to talk to the Minister about that, of course.
How do you feel about that, though? How do you feel about the fact that you just got out of the starting gate and they said, computer says no?
What the Minister announced today was a change in the abatement threshold, which does actually mean that people can earn some more money before the sort of the chopping block starts to enter their income. So that's kind of helpful move forward. But I do have some sympathy for them. They only got this report in February. It's now May. They were donkey deep in a budget round during that time. Let's see what they say in the budget. But the Minister did say that she was going to move forward on these matters in the coming period. And so I think all of us, including you and me, have got to hold her and her colleagues to account for that. So the fact they didn't announce anything today, pretty challenging. That's a $5 billion spend. The fact that she announced movement forward, that's good. Let's see what she says and let's see over what time frame she says it.
But she vetoed possibly your biggest recommendation.
For now. She vetoed it in this year's budget. She said they weren't going to move forward in this year's budget. Now there's going to be a bunch of activist groups and a bunch of people who were no doubt around the Welfare Expert Advisory Group who will be most disappointed about that. I'm sure they'll be making public statements about that as we speak. My view, as one who's done many of these things over the years across a broad range of issues in New Zealand, I think it's important that we bring politicians on board and that we're patient with their political processes, not to say you've just got to do it in 60 days, spend billions. I don't think that's reasonable. The other thing to note is that the social welfare system is an incredibly complex beast. That was another thing that really stood out for me as I studied it. If you change one bit, you impact other bits of the system. And so they do need to be cautious about doing that. I'm not trying to defend them. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to make sure that everybody understands the politics of this. But it is down to them. I said to the Minister today, it's all yours now, Minister. You've got to justify your decisions now. We've given you the report. We'll stay true to the report. You need to justify the politics around the report. So good luck to her for doing that.
Former Business NZ boss Phil O'Reilly, who was one of the 11 members on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, and we'll hear from the Minister Carmel Sepuloni later in the program.